such a knowledge revolution and
if we go back and think
transformation.
about this through the
Every industry
historical
has an opportunity to apply Alvin.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another OGx Live Q&A with Stellar. Thanks so much for joining. We are thrilled to be here again with some AI pioneers. Today we're joined by Brett Flinchum and Morgan Llewellyn, and Alvin McBorrough will be leading the discussion. We're going to be covering a lot of topics over the next hour. If you have any questions throughout, we'd be happy to answer those. I will pass it on. Brett, if you want to introduce yourself first, and then Morgan, and then on to Alvin.
Sure. My name's Brett Flinchum. I'm the CEO of Stellar. We partner very closely with OGx and Alvin on effectively on AI and machine learning solutions for government and for enterprise businesses. And looking forward to being here today. So thank you, Abbey.
Hi, everyone. My name is Morgan Llewellyn. I'm the Chief Strategy and Data Officer here at Stellar. I've got about a 20-year background in data science, AI, machine learning, and really happy to be here with you, Alvin. Thank you for having us.
I think I will go next, Abby. My name is Alvin McBorrough. I'm with OGx. We're a technology and management consultant firm that is based out of Denver. And we do quite a bit of work with our friends here at Stellar around AI, primarily around defining strategy, looking at frameworks, guidelines, and just helping organizations get ready to be able to make the leap into this next major transformational phase that we're looking at within this whole space of AI, machine learning, and large language model, whatever you want to call it. But we're excited for this opportunity to brainstorm and have another round of wonderful conversation again.
Thanks so much. And I know we've got quite a few questions and topics we want to roll through. Yeah, Alvin, I will let you kick it off with some of these foundational concepts.
All right. Thank you again, Abby, and thanks to all of you for being here. So for some of you who may be familiar with the work that we do and the kind of conversation that we've been holding or hosting over the past, I would say maybe month, if not more than a month now, it has been focused around just trying to understand some of the bigger questions that are out there today within this whole space of AI, and just trying to come to terms with some basic understanding. So the questions that we have here were things that were built up from our last conversation we had I think 2 or 3 weeks ago. We had another round of conversation. Fortunately for us, we had the chance of having Brett and Morgan come to Denver. We had an event here in Colorado with a group called SIPA, and it was the Useless Conference, and we had a wonderful time meeting with some of the stakeholders around the state of Colorado, and just seeing the excitement that is beginning to develop across our entire state here has been remarkable. And Colorado is beginning to position itself not only as a thought leader, but just as a leader within this whole space, how our state government is beginning to embrace the whole concept of AI and wanting to make strides to be able to move us to that next level. Something that I'm excited for as a resident and citizen of the state of, resident of the state of Colorado. So I'm really, really happy for that opportunity. With that being said, gentlemen, how about we just jump in with a couple of questions that we were able to generate from our folks on the call, from the previous call, and things that have come up so far. So maybe Morgan, if you want to, Brett, any one of you can take the first one. But one of the questions that came up was just that let's start with the current state of AI technology. Where is it headed over the next 5 to 10 years, from your perspective? If you want to start with that.
Okay, so I think what we're talking about is we've got the current state of AI technology. We're really at this kind of transformational, pivotal moment in AI, where we're seeing us be able to move from very bespoke use cases where we're training individual algorithms, we're training models for a very specific use case. That's traditionally where we've been for the last 20 or so years. Here's a use case, let's train a model. And what we're starting to see now is these broadly applicable large language models, image generation models that are able to be deployed across a number of use cases. And so that's really what we're at right now, is this transformational moment where we're transitioning from specific bespoke AI, very specific to a use case, to generally applicable AI, where you can take that same model and deploy it across a number of different use cases with only some minor changes. And it's really about the implementation of that model that is the difference between, you know, this model. And so that's really where we're at. And so over the next, you know, I don't know, honestly, if we can talk about the next 5 to 10 years, the space is moving so fast. I can't get out on that ledge. But if we talk about the next 5 or 10 months, it's really about adoption. We are seeing people adopt. We're seeing people evaluate. We're seeing people try at a pace we've never seen before. And we're going to see more of that. And I think you're seeing this, hey, look, the space is moving so fast. Do I wait 5 months? And the question is really, you know, I don't know if that's the right question. It's, can you wait that 5 months?
Yeah.
You've got a use case that can be addressed today that can improve, you know, that can improve business or can improve your government, that can improve people's lives. You should evaluate that today. And you shouldn't wait 6 months. And I think really that's where we're at, is we're at this transformational moment. And over the next 5, 10 months, we're going to see adoption at a pace that's, at least in my view, again, 20 years of experience in the field, it's unprecedented to see people demanding AI and really looking at adopting it like we're seeing today.
Yeah. So great point there. And I just got back yesterday from Orlando. I was attending the APTA conference, that's Public Transit Association conference. And again, you know, the entire conference was buzzing with the whole concept around AI. And one of the key things there that we're talking about, I had a chance to speak to a couple of CEOs and CIOs at a private function. And some of the things that we talked about was just the rate around adoption, right? I mean, because some of them are in this position where, do we have to wait, or when is the right time for us to proceed? And, you know, it reminds me of the concept that the right time is now, right? There is no right time. You have to be able to start putting things together. So maybe based on your experience, maybe Morgan, you can take this, and Brett, you can add to this again. What are you seeing people, what direction around adoption? I know we talked about strategy, framework, guidelines. What are some of the things that you're beginning to see clients adopt? How are they adopting this whole concept of AI? So if you can speak to that, that would be brilliant. And from there, I know, Brett, you can add a few to it as well.
Yeah, I can talk about a couple specific use cases that we're seeing and where we're really seeing adoption, you know, kind of move. And one of them is really around, you know, kind of document discovery, document management. I've got all these documents across my organization or across my state. How do I look across that entire document, figure out what is truth, and then be able to surface that back to either a citizen, to an employee, to a, you know, a field tech. And so that is one use case we're seeing across, you know, every industry is, you know, in this document management space. How do you investigate what's out there in your own, you know, corpus of information? How do you pull that information back, summarize it, and present it to someone very quickly and effortlessly? That's one use case we're seeing. We're also seeing some use cases around document generation, where how do you help someone start to generate you know, an initial document, not necessarily the final document, but how do you help generate that initial document? That's another use case that we're seeing. And then finally, the last one is there's a lot of opportunity in the accessibility space around, again, this comes back to document management, but in translation of documents, making those documents more accessible to a variety of end users. That's another use case that we're seeing. So we're seeing rapid adoption really around the, you know, the classification, the organization of this information, and being able to present it back to users. And I want to emphasize users there, because we aren't, you know, it's not that we're not seeing automation, but the primary use case, and we're seeing people adopt it the fastest, is when you do have this kind of human in the, you know, human in the loop, human in the center, where the AI is generating some information for review by an individual. Brett, what do you want to add to that? What are you seeing?
Yeah, you know, a couple of things on the document side. It is worth mentioning fields that are kind of, and this is where I think it's just a unique use case that adds unique value, is things that are notes centric, and this is often in healthcare, and it can be in social work and social services, just to give a few examples, where there's so much rich text and you know, on you know, we use the notion of unstructured data, right, versus tabular or more structured data, where there's all this rich kind of notes, either from physicians or social workers, those types of use cases. We're working on areas in both of those fields where now suddenly, to Morgan's point, you can summarize and really glean valuable insights from the notes that often get lost, right, over time. So I think there's you know, incredibly unique use cases and opportunities there. And then the other just one that's right in front of us that we're all working on, that you're all seeing all the time, and I'm going to use the broad term here, which is sort of virtual assistance, right? And that virtual assistance can be, you know, advising a field technician on procedures, on, you know, a valve change on a utility you know, infrastructure, to telecom use cases, right, of technician assistance, to virtual assistants, even, you know, in call centers, which you obviously see. And, you know, I think we all get frustrated with, you know, the Bank of America pops you a chatbot, or Verizon pops you a chatbot. But, you know, now they're becoming much more sophisticated, and they're evolving really quickly. So that notion of all these various use cases for assistance, and that can be either enabling employees or enabling kind of end customers. I mean, I just think they're wonderful use cases. And I want to glom on to one thing that that Morgan said earlier, which I think is really important. One of the things I think both of us talk about a lot is the notion of participating. Morgan, you were using the word engagement, right? But it's like, you know, I think participating in this transformation for companies, for government, for business, right? You know, these are the use cases we mentioned. They're pretty straightforward. You can apply them to narrow things, you can apply them to broad things at your discretion. But if you want to take small bites and apply them, you know, I think participating starts building those muscles inside the organization of leveraging, you know, LLMs, leveraging generative AI, and by the way, doing it safely and securely, all of which is going to keep evolving. But I think by participating now, there'll be so much benefit for those that are doing that over the long haul. So I don't know if that's helpful, but
Absolutely.
I kind of just want to touch on a question that I know a lot of people are thinking about and talking about, but you know, regarding some of the ethical challenges. But how do we ensure that AI decisions are transparent and interpretable?
Morgan, you have so much rich experience here. I'll let you lead on this one, and I'll chime in. But.
Yeah, so I think the first thing you want to do is be able to have a set of guidelines or ground rules that define, what do you mean by transparency? What do you mean by interpretation? What is ethical? Like, that's the first thing. Like, if ethical to me might be different to you, Abby, or to Brad, or to Alvin. And so what do we mean having a standard set for this specific organization or for this specific use case? What do we mean by ethical? I think is paramount before we can even, you know, describe, you know, is it transparent? Is it interpretable? So having a clear definition of what we mean by ethical, and then having a clear interpretation, what we mean by transparent and interpretable. So the one big advantage, though, that now let's crack that nut open just a little bit. The one big advantage you can get in something like a large language model or an LLM is you can ask for transparency in how it achieved its result. And this is very different from some of the traditional, I'll just say AI and ML models, where you're getting a whole bunch of just, you know, data points essentially, or coefficients that are being summed up and added together, and you're getting an output. Do this, don't do that. Where with an LLM, you can get transparent results of, give me the supporting document you use to arrive at this answer. You know, you told me to, you know, take this action. Why did you tell me to take that action? And give me, you know, quote unquote, give me the receipts, right? Give me the information that you use to come up with this result. And so that really is a difference where you've got transparency sort of out of the box with LLMs, depending on how you implement it. Now, how you implement it though is key, because if you don't implement it and ask for that transparency, then you're not going to necessarily have it in your process. And so being able to define in your guidelines or in your process, this is what we require for transparency of the result. We want to know how you got that, or what information did you use? What source material did you use to arrive at that answer? That allows us to give transparent results that we haven't been able to have before. So that addresses, I think, transparency. Brett, what do you want to add? I'm sure I missed something.
I think that's all really important. And by the way, I'll add to that part is it's hard. And I think folks being aware of that the typical, when you call the big publicly available LLMs, you definitely risk and sacrifice elements of that transparency. And I think doing that, with trusted partners is just super valuable, not to just plug what we do, but how do you actually bring that transparency to the models that you deploy. The other thing, Morgan, I was thinking of, and Abby, this might go a bit of a left turn from your question exactly, but there is the notion of bias, right? And some of those that it kind of overlaps a bit with ethics. I don't know if that is maybe a subsequent question, but just to address it a minute, we all have seen the cases of where models will perpetuate what they're trained on to some degree, and can to the point that the models do have some intelligent capabilities, they can continue to learn from that and kind of misapply some of those if they're not trained on kind of healthy outcomes, right? And I think that now let me take the converse side of that a second. And Morgan is done amazing work in this area. But it's actually, because a lot of time the discussion is how do you mitigate that bias, right? But what I think is really amazing is you can actually improve the bias. You can actually, it's not that, hey, I just got to mitigate the bias, but you can actually do better than the typical human would do. Morgan's done a lot of interesting work, specifically in the HR space. I think it's applicable across a lot of other domains, where you not only are mitigating bias in the model, but you're actually making for fair decision making, those kinds of things. I don't know, Morgan, anything to add there?
Yeah, you're touching something near and dear to my heart. So yeah, let's talk about fairness, because it gets wrapped up in ethical, but often thought of as separate, but they're really the same thing. So when you think about fairness, you think about bias. I think often when we talk about AI, we come from this position of things aren't biased today and AI is going to introduce bias. And that's not quite right. I don't think anyone among us would take a step back, if we take a step back and say, well, you know what, we're not biased in how we do things today. We're all biased, either, inadvertently or advertently. And the difference with AI is we can put in place metrics to measure the bias that's coming off of those AI algorithms. And so again, this comes back to, can we set standards? Like you've seen in HR, you've seen HR starting to move to it. Can you set standards over, a definition for what is acceptable bias? We're never going to achieve perfection, but can we come up with a measure or a standard for what is acceptable bias, be able to measure that concretely, and be able to evaluate our AI capabilities based on that? And if we start seeing, drift, or if we start seeing things violate those standards, we can intervene and we can, adjust that model appropriately. And so that is absolutely key when we think about how do we ensure fairness to some degree. We have to define again, what is fairness? What is acceptable? What is acceptable bias? And be able to then put in place monitoring mechanisms and audit mechanisms to ensure that we're meeting those high standards that we should demand of ourselves.
You know, I don't know what I would have said this, but I recall that many years ago when I studied philosophy, and I think I was reading Plato, and where we talked about justice, fairness, and equity. Here we are today now, fast forward in 2023. Those are still themes that really run through, even in the world of AI. We can go back and draw upon the historical context of how all of these things are applicable to the way that we're going to build a next generation of transformational technologies. So one of the things that you hit on, and I would like for us to talk about that a little bit more, is around, instead of being over reliant on the public AI or data that is generated in the public AI space, some of the things that we are seeing today, that intelligent companies, smart users of this now, are curating their own data sets that they're bringing in. They will still be able to leverage some component, but there is a clear demarcation. This is the data that our decisions will be made on. We've checked them thoroughly. We looked at it from the standpoint of they've been cleansed. They have some level of fairness built into it. There is some level of equity built into it, and all of these things that we're looking for today. So that's one way that we've seen people do that. So if you want to speak to that a little bit more as to what you guys are seeing, how people are parsing or demarcating the data sets in order for them to make the most optimal solution, the most optimal decisions based on the data sets that they currently have, that would be great. So any one of you can take that.
Yeah, I'll do the big broad picture, Morgan, and then you can really dive in deeper. By the way, great question and discussion topic, Alvin. I think that what's so amazing about where we are with the technology and the types of kind of systems and infrastructure we can build is we can leverage proprietary data, right? But we can then combine it with sort of the power of the larger language model. So the simple example there is, let's say, and I'm going to use a business example a second. Let's say a company's got proprietary training materials, right, that they want to train employees on. And they don't want that material going out for broader consumption to a big model that's out in the public domain, right? So they want that data to remain specific to them, remain specific to the employees they train. But by the way, they want to leverage the power of a large language model that has multi-language capabilities, as a simple example, right? So that now my material happens to all be written in English, right? And I'm kind of communicating and I'm training people typically in English, but I may have expanded workforce opportunities with Spanish speaking or Mandarin speaking or other kind of components. So you can leverage sort of the strength of the broader model, but not risk your proprietary data in terms of what you're training. So that combination of both of those is just so, I'm going to use the notion, it's just kind of wonderful and powerful. And that's where I think, again, having some partnership and expertise to establish that capability is really important, because otherwise you do risk your proprietary data out in the public domain. But there's ways to construct that where you minimize that risk.
So if we think about what's happening in the generative AI space, it's very easy for any organization, hit an LLM API, and now you've got LLMs incorporated into your business or into your government. And the reality, though, is that's often not enough. Mm-hmm. For a business, how do you differentiate yourself if everyone has it? For a government, how do you ensure consistency and reliability of the results? And so that's where proprietary data is really necessary. For a business, that proprietary data can help differentiate you from everyone else. Yep. So feeding your own data into the LLM, I'm not necessarily talking about fine tuning. You can take a RAG or retrieval augmented approach, or you can take fine tuning. Both of these basically use your own proprietary data to improve the model, to improve the results of the LLM, and be able to filter essentially what are, zero value recommendations, 1 to infinite recommendations. How do you find the right recommendation for a business? That's what incorporating your own proprietary data into a RAG or retrieval augmented approach or a fine-tuned approach allows you to do. Helps you basically, differentiate yourself from the competition. For a government or an organization, or just if you're trying to use it for your employees, feeding in your own data through a retrieval augmented approach or through a fine-tuned approach, it's going to allow you to be able to give better, more consistent, more reliable information to your end user, which is really what you're after. And that's the big opportunity here in the large language model space. It's not necessarily the large language model itself, it's getting that model to produce reliable and consistent information. That's the big opportunity here. And that's why bringing in your own proprietary data is so important for your organization.
Yeah. So excellent. So one more last question on ethics. And I think this one, I would just like to draw your attention to this. If you guys remember, we had our presentation about 3 weeks ago with SIPA, and we're talking about this video about what we call the AI city of the future, something like that. And one of the pieces in there talked about how AI is going to collect information for us to be able to monitor not just the environment, but the movement of people and all of that. And there were major concerns around that. And that has been something that has consistently come up in discussion with people, be it clients, be it individuals who are just seeking knowledge. So what I would like you guys to speak to here is that how do you balance the innovation of AI with concern about privacy and surveillance? So that is something that I know people are really interested in wanting to hear about.
Morgan, let me give you the hard one.
Thanks, Brett.
Yeah,
This one's tough. This is really tough. And again, I keep harping on the importance of having guidelines, do's and don'ts, because I think if you're in, if you're in the US, for instance, what might be acceptable and permissible use might be different than if you're in a different part of the world. And so having clear guidelines that are accessible and basically identify what are off-limit use cases, I think that is really helpful. And ultimately, it's about trust. So we don't need every individual, every individual on the street doesn't have to understand how AI works. They don't have to understand how AI is being used, but they have to have trust in how it's being used. They have to have trust in who's implementing it. And so clear guidelines around what you can and can't do from a government perspective, I think are really important as individual citizens for us to understand and feel comfortable with what's being used. So that to me is really where it starts, having clear guidelines of this is what we're going to do and this isn't what we're going to do. Brett, what do you think?
Well, I think the thing to know there too is that, once you have, I think those guidelines and frameworks are just so important. And Alvin, I was thinking about it regarding your Plato mention a minute ago, right? What's possible now, and I think is powerful now, is government organizations or businesses. Once you establish those frameworks, and those frameworks can be sort of broad societal kind of frameworks, but also kind of specific concerns and area of focus for you and your particular business or agency, right? That you can also cultivate in that framework. But the key thing there is then you can implement that framework in the design of your AI system. So it's not just that you've got the framework so that you can govern it and oversee it, but you can actually build that framework into the architecture and design of your system. So it incorporates that into its execution and decision making. And, and I think that's the powerful piece, right? But as Morgan said, it starts with defining those frameworks, right?
Yeah. So excellent. So moving on, one of the things too that we just wanted to talk a little bit about, and again, these are just general sentiments and concerns, or what we might even call fears within the community as we begin to look at this whole new transformational impact that we're seeing AI have. One of them has been around jobs, right? We know for sure that there have been many data points out there. The World Economic Forum projects that GDP is supposed to grow, especially in the US. I think globally we're looking at about a $13 trillion industry that is being birthed. We're looking at over the next 4 years, we're looking at GDP impact almost northward of almost $500 billion impact that we're looking at. So pretty significant things that we're beginning to see. But at the end of the day, it comes down, those are great numbers, but it comes down to individuals. So from your perspective, what are your thoughts about jobs that will be impacted, right? If we go back and think about this through the historical lens, and I'm sure that you guys might be a little bit younger than me to some extent, but if you remember when we had the computer come up at one point in time, we said, oh, you know, there will be significant impact. When we had computers arrive in the banks, we said that, well, tellers would not be required anymore. Secretaries would not be required anymore. We saw all of these different shifts happen within the industries, right? So within this context right now, can you guys speak to what are some of the jobs that we think will be severely impacted? There will be some that may not be impacted, but there will be a significant amount of reskilling, upskilling, and retooling for all of us as a people. So if you want to take that, any one of you can take it up, and we can just have some discussion and talk around that.
I mean, I'll have an initial thought. First off, I think to deny that it's not disruptive to jobs is probably not a sincere response, right? We have to recognize that everything happens disruptive to some element of jobs. I think the other thing is to acknowledge that it is fairly unknown, right, Alvin? I mean, I think we can speculate on what that disruption is, but I think it is relatively unknown. And I think your mention of some of these other kind of transformations, like the computer transformation, you even go way back to, farm to industrial revolution transformation, right? There's just huge transformations. And this is probably one of those, right? To the best we speculate. We certainly feel like it elevates the role of people, right? That it continues to simplify elements of mundane tasks, right? Which is aligned to traditional technology innovations. We're obviously actually moving into elements of thought leadership, which is really new and different, right? That differentiates this transformation from some of the prior transformations. One of the ways that I keep thinking about this issue is, and I think about the notion of inputs and outputs, right? And AI is really enabling and Morgan mentioned the notion of, generative AI and generating new documentation and generating new data and that kind of output in. But, on the front end of that, there are human elements to the input side, right? What are the prompts we're asking? What are the questions we're asking? And so I think it's elevating, the human element of defining those inputs and defining sort of, the larger scale of what's going into the AI engine. But there's definitely a disruption. I continue to be super optimistic about it. That there's the greater good is going to far outweigh these risks. But to not acknowledge that there's elements of unknown to that is it wouldn't be sincere. And I don't know, Morgan, you probably got some color there.
Yeah. So a couple of thoughts. So first of all, thinking about at the macroeconomic level, we realize that the labor shortage we've seen over the past couple of years, that's actually going to extend for the next decade or so, as baby boomers continue to retire in greater and greater numbers. And so there's this thread underneath of everything of we need to get more efficient. And this is an opportunity for us to get more efficient through some of this generative AI. And so there's a real opportunity for organizations that have traditionally had a hard time recruiting and keeping folks to basically allow them to become more efficient. So I think that's one thing kind of underneath all of this is, look, we do need more humans. And this is actually going to help us kind of force multiply our human capital. So I think that is actually really positive if it allows us to be more efficient, if generative AI allows us to be more efficient. Now, if we take a look at, how is this revolution different? This, to me, at least initially, is really a knowledge revolution. If
Yeah.
you think about, the industrial level revolution, some of these other things, it really impacts, people working, with machines, or, in the automotive industry, right? Robotics and different things like that. Large language models, it's about knowledge, and it is a knowledge revolution. We're making knowledge more broadly available to folks. We're reducing the cost of acquiring knowledge. I mean, what you can do with something like a GPT-4, do you need 5 years of, post graduate education to achieve that now? I don't know. And so that is what's really exciting to me, is how this is reducing the cost of knowledge acquisition, knowledge, acquiring knowledge. So I think there's that. If we were to take a look at a specific industry, though, that I think is potentially ripe for disruption, it could be software engineering. And the ability, but the question is, are we going to see fewer software engineers because we're going to be able to be a lot more efficient? Or are we going to see more software engineers because now anyone can essentially be a software engineer?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think the jury's still out there. But there is going to be some massive disruption. Whether it hurts an overall group or helps an overall group, I think that remains to be seen. But we are going to see disruption. We're going to see greater efficiencies, and I think it's going to be in those knowledge industries where we're going to see it.
I think that software engineering one, Morgan, is a good one, because the way that I've thought about that is that is kind of a constrained skill set right now, right? Like, you see graduates in software engineering being just enormously valued, right? And generally, as a global entity, we have less code being generated than seems to be needed and required, right? And so this does enable more code generation, more efficient code generation. I think it, starts relieving that supply constraint, right, in that area some. And now then you go, well, is it detrimental to wages and earnings, right, for people coming out of engineering schools? I tend to think not in the near term and even intermediate term, right? Just because I think there's such demand for that skill set. But I actually think that is a good example of, some goodness that happens by being able to propagate more code quickly and bring more innovation broadly.
Yeah. So one of the things that, Brett, you talked about earlier when you started responding to this question, I wrote it down here. You talk about the fact that it will elevate people, right? And you will put people at the center of this. And I'm one of those of the school of thought that, people with AI are the ones that are going to change the world compared to the folks without AI today, right? And I think that's a fact. So maybe one of the questions that came up here was, what is the role human will play in an increasingly AI-driven world, right? So we believe that not only from the standpoint of human using this, but also being the developers, the curators of this particular technology as we see that go forward. There are still things that we believe will be critical because we still need human elements to be able to assess and determine whether this is a good piece of technology that we want to release, whether this is a good thing that we want to bring to market. So there will still be that piece. So from your perspective, what would that role be for humans as you see AI continue to mature and evolve into the next wave of transformational solutions that we've never seen before?
The thing that jumps to mind right off the bat is the notion that as we're building these models, and people like Morgan are really central to this, right, that are building machine learning and Gen AI kind of models, is the notion of training those models, right? And there's incredible importance of, and the common term that you hear is human in the loop, right, in that training, which is providing some elements of reinforcement learning for that training, and continuing to evolve that those elements.
So let me give an example from HR. So if we see what AI's done in the HR space, it's being able to automate a lot of the work that is very manual and button clicky. It's automated some of that. And why? Because it allows more time for the recruiter to talk with the candidate. be able to develop relationships, because ultimately employees want to go work with people, right? They don't want to work for machines or anything like that. And so it makes the whole process more human. And similar, if you think about, you know, a business that's providing a service, you think about a government that's providing a service, what AI and automation are going to help you do is be able to automate a lot of that back end tasks, allow you to do it faster so that you can ultimately have more communication with the end user, with your customer, with your, you know, with your citizen, so that you can provide better service. And that's really what AI and automation are going to allow us to do. It's going to automate all that back end stuff that just takes time and, you know, is kind of yucky, and allow us to really provide better service, develop more personal connections, be more human, essentially.
Just one last question, kind of regarding the economic conversation, but want to get your guys' thoughts on you know, various sectors and industries. Do you think, are there any specific sectors or industries that you think will benefit the most from AI, and which might suffer the most?
Yeah, I think it's a hard one, right? Particularly from the economic side. Let me first comment on the non-economic side a second, right? You know, the opportunities in healthcare for good and positive contribution to society are just amazing, right? I mean, we know that we can you know, basically not only discover you know, sort of diagnose and discover disease and elements, but we actually can formulate new drugs more quickly and efficiently now. Or, you know, you just go down the list on the healthcare side. They're just, if things are well governed and managed, I think, you know, just enormous benefit there. I think opportunities for the environment and complex problem solving, right? That there's just tremendous opportunities. So, you know, those couple of fields, I think the financial services, both banking and legal services, I kind of bucket in there. I think there's a lot of innovation and forward kind of industry movement there. And I would think that the economic implications in those fields are equally relevant. Those are ones that I think, you know, are on the rise in terms of capabilities. Downside's tough. I don't know, Morgan, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I've got a couple that I think are potential poster childrens of who could be impacted. And it really comes down to, you know, industries, fields, roles where your job is to look at some document and essentially summarize it or extract information. So, you know, if you think about, you know, traditional parsing, you know, technologies that are very brittle, hard to maintain, you know, introducing additional languages can be tough. Things like a large language model can do that much quicker. Or if you are an individual and that's your job is, you know, data entry, you know, extract information, data entry, I think that is also really tough, and those could be ripe for disruption. So those would be the two that I would call out. But in general, what I would say is that every industry has an opportunity here to apply LLMs better.
So, yeah, so just going on to the next one here, one of the things that we wanted to talk about, and I think we've had some discussion around this particular one before, is around regulations, right? I mean, over the past few months, we've seen, you know, a lot of folks, even industry thought leaders, call upon the government to start thinking about ways that we need to regulate AI. So I have my own concept about what that really means and how that should be done. So maybe the first spot that we will start with is that it's a simple question here. What role should government play in the regulating of AI?
Yeah, you know, enormously important, Alvin, and I mean, we all know that it's just, and I think the urgency for this, I mean, we just can't speak to it more. You know, to reiterate some things we said, I think it starts with those kind of frameworks, right? Of what are the ethical frameworks? What are the privacy, safety, and security frameworks, right, that are relevant? You know, just I think, and I think that notion of participating and being active in the space now, both as a consumer of LLMs, but then also as a regulator and thought leader and oversight are just both equally important. But regulation on ethical stuff, safety and security, privacy, all the issues we've talked about.
Yeah.
What's interesting is, government's currently regulating those areas now, right? So it's then how do you apply the work that is already underway and already in place in those things to the world of large language models, generative AI, and where AI is heading. And that's where I think participating in that really helps apply that. I think the other interesting sort of comment, and I think there's people on this call that are great experts in all of this, but it's also like, on one hand, you want this notion of regulating, quote, AI, but then on the other hand, it's how it's applied, for example, in financial services versus how it's applied in healthcare. And so it's almost like not regulating AI as a horizontal thing, but actually regulating it as it's applied in some very specific verticals, and leverage the knowledge of those government entities that are currently regulating in those spaces, right?
Okay, great. Morgan, do you want to add anything to that? Because I know we got 10 minutes left, and I have one more last piece. And I think
I'll keep it short.
Okay, why don't you do that? Why don't you do
Just
that?
to paraphrase what
Yes.
Brett said, is, I think the responsibility of government, at least in these early phases, is provide opportunities for folks to evaluate. Evaluate, I think, is the right word here. Evaluate generative AI in a responsible way. So provide a safe environment through guidelines that allows people to evaluate it, not to lock it off and say no, but to give some permission and some safe playground or rules that people can, basically avoid those, those no-nos and make them aware of, like, don't do this. This is the big no-no. Make sure you're doing that. So safe guidelines allow people to experiment and participate. I love that word.
Excellent. So the last question that I have, and from there we'll keep this one really short because we want to make sure we allocate a few minutes here for Q&A. It's around the international framework, right? So one of the things is, should there be an international framework for AI ethics and standards? So that's the question. So the way I like to think about this, and here's my personal bias now. If you recall, back in 1957, we had something called the International Atomic Energy Agency. And it was for peaceful development of, atomic energy, for how we're going to develop and move forward to be able to produce power. So that was something that I think that, from my humble opinion, that would be a kind of model that we'll begin to start looking at around intergovernment agencies coming together, because this is just the beginning of this massive impact that we'll begin to see. And if every independent country and bad actor out there is not subscribing to some level of international standards, then I believe that it would just be open for major chaos in the world. So that's my humble opinion. I hope I wasn't trying to pollute the way you guys think about that. But the question is that, should there be this international framework around ethics and standards for how we develop and how we mature AI over the next couple of years that we find ourselves?
I'll go first. Yeah, so I think it's a great idea. That said, I worry about incentive compatibility. I don't think we know the limit in the potential of what these technologies can do today. And so I don't know how you're going to get a number of different organizations that can hardly, countries that can hardly agree on anything to agree that they're going to limit their participation in this new technology. I just think it might not be incentive compatible. I think it's a great idea. I just think it'd be really hard, to get folks to sign up.
Right here. Okay.
Yeah, Alvin, I'm kind of with you. I think we have to try, right? And Morgan, I think you're right. You're probably thinking about it at such a deep and complex level underneath it. But I think, back to that notion of participating, trying, starting to put those frameworks and in place, it seems just incredibly urgent, right? And it sure is hard to achieve, though, when you think about the notion of bad actors, right?
Yeah.
But at least if you have the frameworks
Yeah.
and you have folks that you've identified are out of compliance, then that leads you at least to another set of actions to explore, right?
Excellent. I just want to say thanks to all of you. Let's open this up now if there are any questions that we might have. Abby, do we have anything coming through? Or anything came through?
Yeah, we've got one here. So how do we prepare the next generation of students for an AI-centric world?
That's a terrific question. You know, super hard to answer, but I keep leaning into this word participating, right? And I think, and Alvin, you do elements of teaching and instruction. You probably have some good insight into this world, but it just seems like it's, you know, incorporating it into curriculum and approach and learning. And, you know, Morgan was making the point earlier that it's such a knowledge, you know, revolution and transformation. And to me, the key thing would be how to participate, how to leverage it, and try to, you know, start exploring how to leverage it for good to actually enhance knowledge of students, versus being too afraid of it, right? Of students. And clearly there's risk in terms of unoriginal thought, right? And some of those components. But I think participating and integrating it is better than not, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and to add to that, I would just say, if we do think about it as, you know, kind of a knowledge revolution, then some of those tools that have been developed as part of, you know, the knowledge industry, the scientific method, hypothesis testing, root cause analysis, how do you interrogate the results and validate the results, I think is going to be really important for a much broader set of individuals who now have this power that they didn't have before.
Yeah, so I was just going to say that this will help accelerate critical thinking. And that is something that I believe that we should be focusing on, especially for students as they confront this particular piece. Because if you can think critically and ask the right questions, I think we'll be able to get better results and they'll be well prepared to be able to move to that next level.
You mentioned earlier that AI can benefit efforts around climate change, healthcare, and food security. Can you give me some examples?
Yeah, let's go with healthcare first, right? Currently, new molecules are actively being identified, right? And so, you know, from a pure drug discovery perspective, right there, I think the ability to iterate quickly, you know, discover molecules, test molecules, all of that's accelerating, and I think a very favorable way. You know, you get into, and I'm not an expert in this, I don't want to convey that, but you get into kind of DNA sequencing and, you know, other kind of components of drug discovery processes. I think it's just amazing. I think climate change is super interesting, and I think there's just opportunities, and I'll keep it simple and say to problem solve right now and to accelerate problem solving. And I think that alone can do so much to, you know, accelerate all the areas of improving the environment that we're exploring, right? That's a broad one. I think there's a lot of specific use cases around it that I'm not super knowledgeable in, but there's a couple of quick thoughts.
Yeah. So I think a question, I mean, based on that, one of the case studies that comes to mind is what there is a nonprofit in Brazil that uses old cell phones to be able to, and they've built this AI algorithm on them that is able to connect a sense, because they've listened to a lot of sounds. As soon as they detect a chainsaw, like illegal deforestation happening, they're able to relay that back immediately to using GIS sensing to be able to geolocate it, send that back immediately to the forest wardens, and they're able to come out and prevent that. And what they've seen in Brazil has been a significant reduction in illegal deforestation that has been taking place. So again, leveraging that to have a profound impact on the economy, on the environment, and some other things that we're also seeing within this space, it has been profound.
Let me, Alvin, elaborate on one, because I've actually personally been deeply involved in a use case that you triggered me when you mentioned that, which is we basically have integrated geospatial data, and we can basically kind of look at the globe and then look at micro areas. And specifically, the work I was doing, there's a little bit of capitalism wrapped up into this, but I think it's good for the environment nonetheless. Is I was working with the company Unilever, and they wanted to certify on their products that all the palm was sustainably sourced, right? And what we were able to do is look at a farm level, across the globe, determine that the palm they were dividing was sustainably sourced, and then trace that through their supply chain and ultimately be able to put it on the bottle, right? That they could certify sustainably sourced materials. So it's pretty amazing, right? That stuff is happening today.
Yep, absolutely. All right, Abby, over to you.
Yeah, very, very exciting. We do have one more question. Are there any resources that you'd recommend for someone looking to dive deeper into understanding AI?
Gosh, Morgan, do you have any favorites?
I mean, my first one is, if you haven't tried GPT, you should go there and just see what people are talking about. That is by far the first one you should go to. After that, I think it depends on your industry, and you should look at what other kind of industry leaders are doing. Those would be my two suggestions.
Yeah, so there are two books that I would suggest, and both of them happen to be by the same author. His name is Kai-Fu Lee. The first one is called AI Superpowers. He wrote that about 10 years ago. That's a great historical context. 90% of his prediction in that book has come true. The next one that he also wrote is called AI 2041. And that's another read, again, that is amazing. Those are my two great reads. It might be a little bit bulky, especially the second one, but I mean, it is fabulous. It gives you a great insight and perspective to understand the power of AI and the future impacts that it will have on all of us. So those are two suggestions that I have off the top. All right. With that being said, any other questions? I know we're about 2 minutes over. Or any other final thoughts from you, gentlemen?
Well, thank you for having us, Alvin. This was a lot of fun. Really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us.
And Alvin, thanks for the work you and OGx are doing in this space. I think it's really going to make a difference. So thank you.
All right. And all thanks goes to Abby. Abby, thank you for convening this. We really appreciate your diligence and your commitment to wanting to advance knowledge. So we're grateful to you. With that being said, we'd like to pass it back to you.
Yeah, thanks again so much. I know we're a few minutes past here. Brett and Morgan, thank you guys as always for the wonderful insights. And this is the second time we've done one of these live Q&As, but just fascinating conversations, and we can never quite get to all the questions. So, and Alvin, thank you so much for leading us in discussion. We will have more coming up that we will keep everybody posted on. So,
Thank you, everybody. Have a great
Bye-bye.
one. Thanks.
Thanks.